Okay, today we are going to be discussing the legal landmines associated with the distribution of religious material on school campuses by public school students. We are also going to be discussing the Equal Access Act and how it impacts schools, clubs, and our communities. And lastly, we will be discussing what precedents have been related to equal access and how it relates to religion and distribution of religious materials at public schools. We are also going to be concluding with how these precedents impact our future administrative practices. I am going to start with the first question. What are the legal landmines associated with the distribution of religious material on school campuses by public school students? Considering our text, the Educator's Guide to Texas School Law, it says that it is unallowable for school personnel or outside organizations to distribute Bibles and other religious material to public school students on school grounds. However, it is permissible for schools to provide a place in public schools where supporters of any faith may deposit religious literature for voluntary pickup. So I picture like a table in a particular place at a particular time that has pamphlets of religious and non-religious literature to be, from how I understand it, permitted. However, it is preferable for a person wanting to distribute religious and non-religious literature to students to do so off school property. But at the end of the day, students are given the right by the First Amendment to distribute religious literature on campus due to the campus policy. So the way I understand each campus has to be specific to the time and the place and the manner of the regulations by the school. And like I said, the rights of the students are protected by the First Amendment, which is the Freedom of Speech Clause. I looked at a few cases that touched on the distribution of religious material in public schools. I looked at the Hedges versus Wakanda Community Unit School District. And I also looked at the Moeller versus Jefferson Lighthouse School District case. And both of these cases fell on the restrictions that the public schools put in place on limiting when and how students could pass out written materials. Both cases ended up, the courts found that public schools can put in place distribution with specific times, like I said earlier, regarding a specific place in the school building. But the school district can provide specific time periods as well. They are also able to review the material prior to distribution. I was very shocked by another case, the Meltzer versus Board of Public Instruction of Orange County, Florida. The book recommended the review of this case, but this was a case held in Florida where the plaintiffs contended that the school system improperly participated in the distribution of Bibles to students on the campus. And the plaintiffs, however, took it to court, and the court found that, considering the Florida state statutes, it said that they couldn't find any ground that uh, that the Bibles could not be distributed based on the law there, which was quiet. I mean, I was shocked. It said in the law, labor faithfully and earnestly for the advancement of the pupils in their studies, deportment, and morals, and embrace every opportunity to inculcate by precept and example the principles of truth, honesty, and patriotism in the practice of every Christian virtue. That was their law in Florida. So I think out of all the cases, that was the most shocking to me. So that was my question.
That is surprising. That was the law.
No.
It seems kind of in complete opposition of the Establishment Clause.
I know the Constitution. It didn't tell me the verdict after it was appealed, so I don't know how it concluded. But I was definitely shocked by that court's resolution.
Wow.
I know I've been on Tarleton campus crossing over towards the library and had several people handing out little mini Bibles there, and I wonder if maybe they had permission by the university to do that, or if that was against the law.
Interesting.
I don't know.
We have I'm at an elementary school, and we are partnered with, it's called the Read to Win program, and elementary schools are partnered with neighborhood churches, and they come in and they provide they're just reading partners. But at Easter time, they brought Easter baskets for the kids, and they all had a Bible in them if they brought them for their partner kid. But they had to leave them on the stage, and it was if the child and their parent chose to go and pick up the Easter basket, then they could get it. And I remember thinking, why don't they just hand it to them? Like, it'll be a lot easier. Why are you putting them on the stage? But then after this class, I understand why they weren't allowed to just hand them out to the students. It made more sense of why they had to be set on the stage and picked up if the parent chose to pick them up with the child.
Well, now you know. Question number 2. You ready for that?
Yes.
Okay. My question is, what is the Equal Access Act? I will try not to go too in-depth about it and save some room for the next couple of questions. The Equal Access Act, in a nutshell, is... Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, making sure I didn't have it muted. It is if a school district receives federal money and allows non-curricular activities and club meetings, then it is against the law to deny the students the right to meet for religious activities. And from my understanding, almost all public schools receive federal money, so that puts all of our schools in this category for the most part. Congress passed this act based on the free speech determination of Widmar v. Vincent. In this case, the University of Missouri refused to allow a religious group to use the university's facilities because they didn't want to violate the Establishment Clause. Well, let's go back over the Establishment Clause. It says that this is the first, well, the Establishment Clause is the first part, is the first part of several parts of the First Amendment, stating that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This, I guess, essentially prevents Congress from passing legislation that promotes one religion over another religion. The court ended up ruling in Widmar v. Vincent that to refuse religious groups access of facilities while allowing other groups to use the facilities violated the students' right of free speech. Therefore, if a public school has non-curricular activities that is not required for class purposes, which is not part of the curriculum, then the school has created a limited open forum, and I believe, I wish I knew the how many schools were limited open forum and how many were not, and why some schools would choose not to be. It's a question I'll look into further later. If a limited open forum exists, then all groups, regardless of their political, religious, or philosophical beliefs, may hold meetings and use these school facilities. And it kept talking, some sources would say high school, other sources said secondary. After further investigation, it's junior high and high school, although the books sometimes just say high school. One of the requirements is that it must be student initiated, it must be student led, and it must not be sponsored by the school. And when thinking about this, at the past couple of schools I've been at, an example would be, the only example I could come up with is maybe FCA, which is Fellowship of Christian Athletes. They meet on Fridays at our school, and they have a what they call a breakfast of champions, and they allow everyone to come, but they pray, and they have little scriptures, and preachers come and talk, and things like that. As opposed to the limited open forum, there's also closed forums. This is when public schools do not open their schools for general public use and are not related to school curricular purposes. And the third one I read about was just a public forum, which is kind of like parks, sidewalks, and it seems to me that they are extensively protected under the freedom of speech. Does anybody have anything they'd like to comment on that?
I was confused when I first started looking into it, is that like you said, the Equal Access Act pertains to secondary schools. And it's different from, it came out of the Establishment Clause, but it doesn't pertain to, like, outside people coming in and using your building after hours. And so there's a difference there. And I thought they were all kind of part of the same thing until I started researching the Act.
I remember, like, when I was in elementary school, I'm pretty sure our elementary school and our middle school were both used for, like, to hold church on Saturdays because they didn't have a building. So, interesting there. Didn't know that, well, I guess I knew you could do that, and I guess this kind of brings it on home to that you can.
Mm-hmm. And so would that be considered part of the Equal Access Act, or would that just be part of the Establishment Act, like outside agencies using it? That's where I kept getting confused.
I think that the school can deny access to religious activities in elementary schools, but if they want to allow it, they can. They just have the right to make it unlawful if they choose to.
But then if they allow one, they have to allow everything. Or they have to, that doesn't disrupt, I guess.
So I'm elementary, and we have the Good News Club that we've all read about. They come every week after school hours, but it's kind of funny because you can hear them worship songs throughout the school when you're walking by, but you don't ever see a teacher in there. And obviously the Good News Club is led by a church group that comes in and donates a lot of their time, you know, for us preparing meals and things. So going back to some of the cases that all of the cases that I noted earlier, I needed to clarify that I was referring to secondary, not elementary. Elementaries, from everything I've read, elementary's they're sticklers, because kids are, you know, more likely to be led by, you know, what adults say and things like that.
They have a harder time distinguishing between student-sponsored and this is school-sponsored.
Right.
Okay.
One more question I had was, I was asked at my previous school if they asked me to head up the FCA, and they said, will you be in charge of it and get it going? and I denied because I was too busy with sports. Would I have been unlawful by heading up? Because it has to be student initiated.
I don't know. Because then you get into what's acceptable for teachers and what's not acceptable for teachers. I don't know, would teachers be able to participate even though it's student initiated? Because in our last topic, when we were talking about church and state, it was saying that teachers could be there, but they couldn't be active participants.
And I
Right.
think go ahead.
Well, sorry. I remember reading that, a lot of times the event has to be supervised by a teacher, but the way I'm taking everything cumulatively that we've read, to be on the safe side, I wouldn't be involved.
Well, I mean, I know I'm a secondary person, and I know on our campus, if any student wants to have a club, they have to have a school sponsor. So whether it's anime club or I guess some kind of religious club, like we require you to have a school sponsor. So is that unlawful?
I think that the school teachers can participate if it's not curricular, if it's before school, if it's during non-instructional time.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's during instructional time, then that's when they have to kind of be hands off.
I mean, if to that point though, I think that there's actually been some cases where I've read, and I was trying to find them real quick, but where a couple things were like, Chelsea, you said that y'all require a sponsor to be at it. There's a case, and like I said, I couldn't find it, where they filed a lawsuit because the school said they couldn't meet because they didn't have a school sponsor, and that the court actually sided with the kids, saying that they couldn't keep them from meeting just because they had a school sponsor. And then you read some things that say that the school can say you have to have a sponsor. As far as teachers being involved, there's cases where I think that a teacher can be there. I think they have to be in a custodial role, to where basically it's making sure good behavior is taking place and making sure that there's nothing gonna obstruct education or the environment. But I don't think that we're allowed to participate. There's actually been superintendents, principals, administrators that have been had lawsuits filed against because they bowed their head while students were saying a prayer, or coaches bowing their head on the sidelines. So I think it's kind of one of those things where you can get yourself in trouble real quick if you don't just kind of take the, not having an opinion on any of it, just being there to make sure they're not doing something stupid, I guess.
I think at the end of the day, from what I'm gathering, we have to remain neutral in every situation, which I have my own personal opinions that I won't discuss on here about that.
I'm pretty sure half of our campus, a majority of our teachers would be fired. Almost every single coach we have would be fired if these laws were sticklers in Texas. I think maybe small town Texas, maybe different laws, different rules apply to you. Maybe there's a lot of participation in prayer and before and after school, Christian activities and stuff like that.
And that was new to me when I moved to Texas, because I'm from the East Coast, and we didn't have a lot of like meet at the pole or student-led prayer groups. And then when I moved down here to Texas, that's when I started seeing more of the prayer groups and religious groups being student-led.
And Chelsea, you want to go?
I work in small town America, and we pray at everything. And the kids pray at everything, the teachers pray at everything, the administrators pray at everything, the superintendent prays at dang near everything. So if we were super lawful, we would be going to court a lot.
And what I was going to say is to add to your point about small town America, is I live in small town America too. I mean, Chelsea and I kind of live in the communities that are structured the same way. And there was actually an ag teacher at one of the schools here in the county who got real involved in his church, and he brought a bunch of Bibles to school and set them on his desk and was handing them out to kids in class. And in my head, before I took this class, I was going, man, that's got to be illegal. And now you read how illegal it is, but yet nobody ever turned him in or anything. So it's an interesting situation.
Interesting.
As an administrator, I think as a teacher we're kind of more laxed on things, but most of us want to be future administrators. I think that sometimes it's easier to play safe than sorry, because you're always going to have that one person that could say, be offended by it.
And then technically the law is on their side, regardless of the majority. Okay, are we ready to move into question 3?
Yep.
Okay, question 3 was looking at taking the act. How does that impact the schools, the clubs, and the communities directly? So building on what Jaden was talking about, one of the big things where schools, a lot of the cases involved the schools that weren't allowing religious clubs. They weren't allowing them on the basis of the Establishment Clause and saying that if we allow them, then it's going to look like we support one religion over the other. And the Equal Access Act actually does not violate the Establishment Clause because it is student-led and student-initiated. And the court in precedent has said that secondary students are old enough and mature enough to be able to differentiate between something that is school-sponsored and student-initiated. Whereas I think that gets a little muddier, as we were saying, with elementary schools. One thing that school officials need to be aware of was that the law was originally promoted and supported by Christian groups that wanted the right for religious and Bible clubs and prayer groups. But now in this day and age, the law actually does encompass all student groups that may come forward, and so that does include your lesbian, gay, bi, transgender, and questioning groups, atheism, goth, Satanism, Wicca, really anything that student groups may want to meet about. In fact, one of the cases that set this precedent was Boyd County High School Gay Straight Alliance Club versus the Board of Education of Boyd County. The court concluded that the school was obliged under the Equal Access Act to give the Gay Straight and Alliance Club the same opportunity as any other school facilities and use of their bulletin boards, posters, distribution, and so forth that was given to all of the other non-curriculum related clubs. And so interesting fact is that a lot of the people that are now protesting the availability or the allowance of all of these other clubs are the Christian groups that first said, you need to let us in and have this. And so they kind of pushed and got this law written for equal access, and now they're not all very happy about allowing everything. School officials also need to understand a couple of the things that Chaden mentioned that are in the law. What does it mean for a meeting? What does non-instructional mean, and what does non-curricular mean? A meeting under the law includes those activities of student groups which are permitted under a school's limited open forum that we talked about earlier, and that are not directly related to the school curriculum. Non-instructional is any time that is set aside by the school before actual classroom instruction begins or after actual classroom instruction ends. And this is where it got a little muddy, and a couple cases came up. In Donovan versus the Poxitawney Area School Board, the high school there created an in-school activity period that was actually in the school day, but it was a free period where clubs and student groups were able to meet and get together. And during that activity period, the school allowed at least one non-curriculum related group to meet, therefore, the Third Circuit Court held that the school violated the EAA by not allowing a Bible club to meet during that activity period. And originally the school board said, but it's during our school instructional day. But the court held that because other non-instructional groups and non-curriculum groups were meeting even in the middle of the day, they had to also allow religious groups to meet, even if it was during the school day. And so that was interesting, because then it led to another case where it talked about whether or not they could meet during lunchtime. And this is the Cenaceros v. Board of Trustees of San Diego. And this was in the Ninth Circuit, and several groups were meeting during lunchtime. And they didn't want, the schools did not allow a religious group to meet in lunchtime. They said you can meet before or after school. But the student, Melanie Cenaceros, wanted to meet during the lunchtime with her group. And the court said they had to allow her because lunchtime is non-instructional time, because no actual instruction is going on at that time. So it's not just before or after school. And then school officials, non-curricular is actually kind of a broad term, and the court has set up some questions to help you determine whether it's curricular or non-curricular. But they don't just look, the court doesn't just look at what's written down in the school board as curricular. They look at what the practice is of the stated policy within that particular school, not necessarily in the district, but in that particular school, what is considered curricular. And a couple questions that you can ask yourself to say, is it curricular, is it not curricular? Is the subject matter of the group actually taught through a classroom session and is regularly offered to students? Is the subject matter of the group, does it concern body of courses as a whole? Is participation required for that particular course at other times? And do students receive academic credit for that subject matter? And if so, then it can be termed, it can be deemed that that club is curricular because someone's getting credit for it at some point in time. That's kind of what the school needs to be aware of. Students especially need to be aware that clubs can be disallowed or closed or shut down if they interfere with the orderly conduct of educational activities within the school, or they interfere with the school's obligation to protect the well-being of its students. So just because you want a club doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want to do. You do have to be within the guidelines of orderly conduct and well-being of students. And one case that I found that supported that was Cordillo v. Lubbock Independent School District, where the court concluded that the school could restrict both access and student speech, where the website advertised on flyers to be distributed by the Gay Straight Alliance Club contained a link to a website that contained sexual activity, and the actual state law makes it a crime for minors to engage in sexual acts. Therefore, because there was a link, the school was within its rights to ban those posters and those flyers and say that they're not allowed to go out, because under the order and discipline part of the law, it could be, gay students could be sexually harassed, and the school district could become liable under their Title IX sex discrimination lawsuit. And then also the well-being of students. The Act accepted the school's argument that it was obliged to protect its students from teen pregnancy, sexually transmitted diseases, and other harms associated with teen sexual activity. Therefore, the court ruled on side of the school district and said that they were well within their rights to ban these posters and flyers and things of this club because of that clause of the Act. And then finally, the community. What the community needs to be aware of is, as we were talking about earlier, under Jaden was that the Equal Access Act impacts student-initiated clubs, and it does not directly impact the use of the school facilities by non-school groups, That's actually covered under the Establishment Clause and viewpoint discrimination under the Constitution. And that's where the Good News Club comes in, and using the use of the school by the Good News Club is if the school opens up its doors to any other community groups or any other community involvement, then it has to also allow for religious groups to use its building on its premises. And that's what we were talking about with the Good News Club. And so that's kind of how it impacts the school, the students, and the communities. Do you guys have anything to add?
Unmuted now, sorry. You were talking earlier about a case where the Christian group could meet like during lunch hour.
Mm-hmm.
We call it taking care of business, a TCB time, and our kids have an hour lunch, or if they hadn't taken care of business and they're failing in class, they have to do, get their grades up during that 30 minutes, and they have a 30-minute lunch. Well, we also use that time to meet with groups, because I'm the FFA advisor, so a lot of times, like I'll have my officer group come in and use it as group time. I don't know if there's any Christian groups, but I wonder if that is like going on in our school, because I do know that there are Christian student groups that are doing that. So that's kind of interesting. That kind of really raised a flag with me, and especially being a future administrator in probably this really small town.
I know, I think that's where it would get confusing, and I think that's where a lot of these cases are coming up, is that schools are trying to abide by the Establishment Act. They're trying to do what's right under the Constitution, and so it's, am I violating the Establishment Clause, or am I violating the Equal Access Act? And I think that's where it's hard to walk the line, and at least for me, I think it's hard to walk the line.
I'd agree.
And the only thing I'll add to it is I was thinking about the school district I'm leaving. I'm kind of leaving one school district, going to be an ag teacher in a new school district. And at the older school district I had, you always knew there was a lot of things that weren't necessarily in line with the law as far as that school district goes. It's kind of surprising that it's still open, but we won't go there. But basically, the coach was having FCA meetings in the middle of his athletics period, and he was leading them. And so now, you read all this stuff and you listen to people talk and all this. And I was sitting here thinking, if one kid, like you said earlier, it only takes one kid would have basically, I guess, protested that, the school district would have been in deep water, let's put it that way, because he required all the kids in athletics to participate. So, I mean, it's eye-opening.
That's crazy. Anybody else?
Well, and I mean, I don't know. In my district, I worry more about the parents. You get one parent, the kids are usually down for, whatever, this is cool, but it's the parent you have to worry about that wants, some cash flow or...
And I think that's more, at least I would think that's more common in elementary, because the kids go home and tell their parents everything, and then it's the parents that are stepping in, sometimes on their own behalf, not necessarily on the behalf of the students, but on their own behalf. Whereas I think with secondary, kids make more of their own choices and probably discern between, I'll tell my parents this, but not this.
Mm-hmm.
You're right.
Okay, question I have right quick. We have a study hall period also, and where FCA meets, and it's non-instructional time for half the students, but for the other half of the students who haven't taken care of business, it is instructional time. So what's the difference between, can they outlaw it, or, we do it, are we doing the right thing or not doing the right thing? Do you know, Jennifer?
I don't know. I honestly don't know, because even though I'm elementary, we have a intervention period, but the kids that don't need reading or math intervention, then they are allowed to participate in other clubs, or they can make their own clubs, and we have an art club, and they can participate in other groups that aren't required to attend the intervention. So that would fall along the same kind of lines, whereas some students are required to do instruction and some have that free choice.
Agreed.
So
Yeah,
would
I
it
think
be that the law is on the side because instruction is happening at some point?
Yes.
Agreed. Matthew, what were you going to say, Matt?
No, I was just going to say I think that my personal interpretation of it, and probably get me thrown to the Supreme Court someday. I mean, it's like, if you have that where some kids are required to have instruction, but if they're taking care of business and they have that free time, if you're allowing that, then in my opinion, that doesn't, constitute instructional time. And like I said, I may be wrong, but it's kind of like a tutorial type period, or like the activity period in that Donovan Punxsutawney case. It just makes me wonder, what did they do with that activity period? Is that something where if a kid was falling behind, hey, you got to come do tutorials, and if not, like Chaden said, they can go, or maybe you said in elementary, they can be in other clubs. I think if they're not being instructed and it's not a required instruction, then that's probably not an instructional time. But like I said, y'all see me on Fox News and CNN someday, probably.
Hopefully not.
Wonder then, that kind of brings up another point. I wonder then if one of those students that is being required to go to intervention or take care of business because they didn't take care of it other times, I wonder if one of those students could then come forward and say, you're not giving me equal access because other people are able to do clubs and I have to go to intervention.
I was actually having the same thought. I was wondering, is that something that's opening a door for somebody else to say you're discriminating against me because I had to go to tutorials and so I couldn't go to the club. So
I don't know. That's interesting. I mean, that's something to do a little bit more research on. I had always kind of been thinking along the lines of religious groups or the lesbian, gay, bi groups, gay alliance groups, and things like that. Those are the clubs that seem to be questioned most of the time. I hadn't even really thought about whether or not students could say, I'm being discriminated against because I need intervention. So it's something to think about.
Well, we can go on and go to the next question. The question is, what precedents have been set? Can y'all hear me? Okay. What precedents have been set related to equal access as it relates to religion or otherwise? Both of y'all have already, three of y'all have already stated kind of the same precedents that have been set, but here are a few more. There's many cases dealing with the Equal Access Act. I kind of Googled it, and there's so much. But a few that I read in the book were the West Side Community Schools versus Mergens. This involved a Christian club that wanted to use the school before and after school hours for religious discussions and worships. The school did not grant access to the club because they were not a curriculum-related club. But because there were other clubs on campus that were not curriculum-related, they had to grant access to the same facilities to the Christian group as they would any other group, such as the surfers group, the chess group, whatever. So that kind of set the precedence for this Equal Access Act, as anybody needs that access. Another case that I found pretty powerful when it comes to the EAA is the HSU versus Rosslyn Union Free School District. In this particular case, the students wanted to restrict the membership of those only to Christian faith. The case went to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, which ruled that the group must grant access to all students. They can't say you have to be this religion, you have to be this religion. They have to have access to everybody. However, the board members of the group, such as the president, the vice president, secretary, those people, they could be restricted to those only of the Christian faith. You take that for what it is. I think administrators really need to definitely look at this act so that if that comes up in the future in high school, definitely you know what you're doing there. A few more cases are the Clark versus Dallas ISD. Where is it? The Lambs Chapel versus Center Morchis Union Free School District, all of which have set the precedents that you must be able to grant access to the PA system, the school, for any group that wants to participate. The precedents that have been set forth are comprised of several situations. There are guidelines in place now for these clubs. They must be hosted at a secondary school, like you said earlier, a middle school or a high school that receives federal funds, which is, I think, all of them, most of them, good large portion. They must already have a limited open forum. All attendance must be voluntary. The students must initiate the group. It cannot be sponsored by the school, and it cannot be disruptive. These guidelines were set in place because of the West Side school district case, the Lambs case, the HSU versus Rothland Union Free School District, the Lubbock case. So that's kind of where they're coming from. These groups must remember that the school has the final say for monitoring the meetings and prohibiting community members to attend the meetings, and to say if, they are being disruptive during the school time, or before school or after school. Anybody have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was muted. I didn't realize I was muted. I forgot. So back where it was saying that students of any religion need to be allowed into a school, even if it's a Catholic school. That's what you were saying, right? But the teachers and the admin, they could be particular about whether or not they were a certain religion?
No, the students.
Okay.
The students wanted it to only be a Christian group, but
oh, okay.
They can't do that. They have to open it to everybody. However, the board or the whatever you want to call them, they could be Christian, and that is lawful to elect them based on that. But you have to allow every student to participate if they choose to.
Oh, okay. So that's what you meant about the officers of the club, like the president of the club. They can put stipulations on whether or not they're a certain denomination, but anyone had to be allowed in.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I guess if nobody, does anybody else have anything else, or we'll move into that last thing, kind of tie it all together. I mean, basically, my question was, how does it impact administrative practice in public schools? And I think that there's two different aspects to look at it from. I think it opens an entire whole other can of worms, if you want to say, as far as administrators and what we will do when we become administrators, because it creates an entire whole other set of responsibilities that, on top of everything else you got to do, you've got to stay on top of these clubs. And I don't want to use the word like policing them, but I mean, basically that's what it boils down to, is that you have to make sure that you basically have to make sure that they're not violating, like Chelsea, like y'all were just talking about, that they're not violating the Equal Access Act by saying, hey, well, you're not Baptist, so you can't be in the Baptist student clubs, or you're not Methodist, you're not whatever. So it brings up a whole other set of problems there. I think that one of the main things we have to do is how does it impact your administrative practice, is you have to make sure that if you have one non-curricular club, that you have, basically what you've done there is you've created that limited open forum, and so you have to allow everything else, everybody else that, from, like you said, Jennifer, from any club that wants to, if they want to do an underwater basket weaving club, I mean, you've got to let them make a club. And so it's one of those deals where it's kind of restating everything everybody said all along, so I'm just going to try to make it really quick and kind of to the point. But basically, you got to make sure that if you have one, you got to let them all in. They have to meet outside of instructional time, and you've defined what non-instructional and instructional time is. You know, I did read somewhere where school districts have to be careful not to try to go around the Equal Access Act and state that all clubs must be school board approved, because I assume there's some school districts that have tried that in the past, and that got them in trouble. The one thing also in Dovey-Duncanville, I see that they tried to use the Equal Access Act to extend to allow coach-led prayer before games, and the court actually came back, and this is their actual statement, is although teachers or other school personnel can be present at religious meetings, Equal Access Act permits school personnel to be present solely in a custodial capacity, merely to ensure order and good behavior. So that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I mean, you can't lead it. It's got to be student initiated. And so it's a whole other set of rules there that we have to follow, and make sure that our teachers are following, because our teachers are the ones that, as administrators, they're going to get us in trouble. I mean, and I hate to say that, because you know, we're all teachers right now, I assume, but you get your administrators in trouble, and they're the ones that have to go, you know, before the court and stuff. So, really, I think that, and then as far to go back all the way back to Emily, what you talked about is distributing religious materials. There's just another one. I mean, you said you envisioned a table. I envisioned like a La Quinta, like the hotel has a little thing with all the flyers up there, and so something like that, just like you said, a table where they can put everything on. And so I think that what that does is it's just one more thing you've got to police, but you've got to make sure that everybody has access to it. So I think that's what the question's asking, and I'll let you guys add anything to that or ask any questions if you want.
I think you're right, Matt, is that there are definitely some things, and I'm learning now that I'm studying to be an administrator under this act, that I didn't understand or didn't know prior to this class. And I know it's a little different being in elementary school, but we have teachers all the time that will start. We had a teacher start an after-school etiquette club, and they didn't really go through admin. It was just something that a couple of the kids in the class were interested in doing, and so the parents and the teachers got together. And I don't think anyone would question the etiquette class, but it kind of leads to some clubs may be started, and if you're not aware of what's going on in your school, or if your teachers aren't aware of the rules, you could end up getting people in trouble. So I think that was an important point, is you kind of, as an administrator, you need to make sure that everyone's aware of the rules and what's going on.
I'm going to piggyback off Jennifer. I know that one of the leading questions that my principal asked in her interview is, would you be interested in leading a club? If so, what would that club be? That's like her final question. And if she gets a teacher that says, I'm not interested, or, you know, she doesn't even look at them. And so I know the clubs are going to, you know, they're turning into big deals, and so we need to be ready for them. But, I mean, I led a running club, and then I eventually, we held a 5K, and it ended up being great. But I mean, I agree, Jennifer. I had no idea about these laws, and I think that as a principal, you need to pull all your teachers in as part of the, you know, August back to school PD, and address, you know, a whole presentation on clubs and the rules and regulations, because, I mean, I didn't know. So just something to think about.
I would like to think that there's a book, or the school board builds something like a condensed version of all these rules and all these laws. It's access and easy to read and available. You know, you maybe hand out those things for your teachers so that way they're aware of it also. It'd be a good idea.
Key phrase being easy to read.
Yes.
Does anybody have anything else to add? our discussion? Okay, well, I think that wraps it up. I'm going to end this broadcast.